Good morning. This is Jim Whining, and I'm your host today for The Ordinary Man. And we're going to be talking about prepper or planner. And I'll tell you something, I'm a person who's experienced disasters. Now, not major, but definitely life experience changing. Once in Lee Summit, and when we lived out in Lone Jack, the power outages hit with a snowstorm. This has been maybe 10 years ago or so. And guess what? No water, no electricity, obviously no heat, and that was quite an experience. In fact, my wife and I and kids, we had to go to into town to the school, which was having difficulties itself, to take a shower because that outage lasted 5 days. And once again, we were in South Padre Island having we thought a relaxful spring break, but it turned out to be a power outage event that knocked out all the electricity in our apartment on the island. No water, no electricity, and no heat or cool. And so those two experiences I have experienced in my life, and I know how inconvenient and how frightening it is to explain it to children. And that's our stewardship responsibility. Those kids are, aren't they? God gave those to us to do that. So today's subject is prepper or planner. A look at it by the ordinary man. The need for a prepper action is rare, but the need for a planner action for power and communication outages needs to be a stewardship priority. Planning for a 14 to 30-day hiccup event is clearly more imminent, as I just said, than ever before. Why? Because of today, in case you haven't noticed, there's quite a bit of social unrest, political conflict, and increased power demands like you wouldn't believe. I can't believe the power structure and all the power it needs that are going on today for AI and all the other activities all around us. And we have to realize that this is going to have an impact. There are only three power grids. There's the West, the East, and Texas. And any one of those, of course, is subject to a social unrest difficulty, but also just a normal operation difficulty. So planning for the long-term disasters lasting 30 or more months is not what we're going to be talking about because this requires greater support through a collective means, such as a government, a church, or some designated nonprofit. Today, though, we only look at what we can do as a family unit and reasonably handle conflicts for a short period of time. 14, I say 14 to 30 days. So what do you do as a planner of the family? You're responsible to your family for the lights, for the heat, for the internet, for communications, the telephone, etc. So what do you do when there's a power outage? What do you do when there is a communication outage? And how long can you prepare yourself for that? In other words, do you need to have a reasonable amount of food, a reasonable amount of water, um, and the basics, food, clothing, and shelter available without interruption? The answer is yes. Now, I'm not talking about prepper thing. I'm not talking about filling your basement up with 3 years worth of food and all of that type of thing. Oh no. I'm just talking about getting by the emergency circumstance. And that's essentially what we as a family unit can do. You get into that prepper thing and then you're way into the needs of collective action. And I believe in collective action, but that's going to come with other people and with other entities, like a church, a business, or a nonprofit, or a government entity that can help you through the situation. And I'm recalling, of course, the horrible hurricane that hit New Orleans and how many months it took to get some sort of remnants of a society back. But today, when we look at it from a planner, what should I be planning for? Well, the first thing, you need to have an area that's safe. in your house where you know that the conditions, regardless of what would happen, power outage, a flood, um, whatever it might be, that area probably is not going to be affected. So you find a safe area in your house to put stuff. And what is the stuff that you should put in there? First, when we look at food and water, we have containers. And we want to make certain that those containers will last. And also, so you have enough water, a reasonable amount of water, say a gallon provided for each person in your house, stored for 30 days. In other words, you would have basically for each person, you would have somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 30 gallons of water per person. I say a gallon per person, but probably a half a gallon to a gallon. And you have a gallon of water saved for each person in your household. And that water is okay there probably for 4 to 6 months, but then you need to reintegrate it back into your family's normal usage. Don't let stuff just stay down there for years and years and years. That peanut butter jar that you've had down there for 3 years, don't open it, throw it away. So then you have water, and then you need food. Now, what kind of food do I put down there? Well, do I put fresh vegetables? Well, no. Do I put things that have short perishable life? No. Look for canned items that would fit down there. Or for you're only talking about maybe 2 weeks to 4 weeks of food necessities. But you should provide, if you can, to make certain that there is at least 6 to 8 ounces of protein for each person every day that's in your house. And that can be a can of tuna. That can be um, any sort of protein type product. And do you need carbohydrates? Yes, you do need some carbohydrates. Now, don't just load up with beans and those types of things, but make certain that you have a blended amount of carbohydrates, proteins. There's going to need to be some sugars, but put some reasonable amounts of food and target, like I said, 30 up to 30 days for each person. And then every 60 to 90 days and pick up a magical date, rotate the food and put that food back into your normal food uh, upstairs or wherever you keep it, your refrigerator, and you begin eating it. Don't leave it down there. Get it rotated. Now, I must say that when you have food, you also have to have shelter. And should it be a disaster that your shelter becomes unacceptable, you need to figure out where else you can shelter yourself and also transport your needs. Shelter is very important. So if your house, for example, doesn't have the availability of a sheltered space, say you had a tornado that wiped out your roof, of course your plan would be to get to a hotel. But there may be so many other people, your chances of getting into a motel was zero. Then you have to look at other means, including how you can utilize your own cars and trucks. But literally realize that you can only plan it for so long. It's not going to be comprehensible for you to sit there and think, well, I can handle this for 6 months. And the answer is most of us cannot last that long. We have to we have to be connected with a larger community source to protect our families and ourselves. So food, shelter, and always plan for winter. And I guess even in Texas, always plan for coldness, simply because um, hot can be resolved by removing apparel. Cold cannot. So make certain that you have clothing that can get you through that type of disaster if it happened in the winter. I know that one of my experiences, like I said earlier on in this little broadcast, we lost power from a snowstorm and it was colder than cold. Now, fortunately, our house had a fireplace and we used it and we had wood. But just remember um, to have some coats and some sweaters and some other heavier items available for everyone in the house to protect them from the inclement conditions which can occur during this time of disaster. Now, communications. When I talk, basically, when you're in that 2 weeks or 4 weeks of disaster, you're looking at food, clothing, shelter, and emotional needs. Those are the four things. Um, we've talked about food, we've talked about clothing, we've talked about shelter. But the big thing that kind of falls into place is communication. It's very important to own a emergency radio. Did you hear what I said? It's very important to own an emergency radio, not railroad, radio. Why? Because there will be over that broadcasts of what's going on, which you need to know because that will impact you. How long the power is going to be out, how long the roads will be closed, if there's any difficulties coming with further weather. You need to have an emergency radio and make certain that it is a radio that can be used in a variety of means. In other words, with batteries, with direct electricity, with a hand crank, with solar. That's the kind of battery that radio that literally will provide you with a means to get a hold of and hear what is going on in the world. Because chances are that phone that you live on, and we all live on, streaming is going to be interrupted, and you're not going to have internet connection or any phone connection on your computer at all. Period. Zip. And so that radio you need to have is an emergency radio. Now, two other things I want to mention before I close when you're thinking about protecting your family, that's our stewardship. I mean, God made that very clear in the Bible. And all of us here uh, believe that the stewardship is probably your most responsibility, is your greatest responsibility to your children. And one two other items. Make certain that you have a means of warmth, and it can be um, a place that you can have a fire to be built. It could be a location that is warm and has and you can keep, like, for example, in my basement, I know the temperature will never go below 60 because it's 9 feet into the ground. But see if you can find in your shelter a place that you can stay warm or cool if it's unbearable hot. Um, that's so important. Also, you need to have a safety device, and I say that safety device because there could be peril that could come your way. And I have never owned a gun, and I'm not recommending that to anybody. But you might have something for a safety. It could be a knife, it could be a rolling pin, but something that in case there was a threat, because things do in a very short period of time turn desperate, and you never know um, what lurks behind that door that you need to be prepared for. So be certain that you have some sort of a device that can provide your family some safety. And safety is important because the disposition of people in a very short period of time under duress and with a lack of hope can become violent. And in today's world right now, I think we see more violence than I have seen in the 60s during the race riots in this country. I am seeing today violence for no reason at all and protests that make no sense at all. When I grew up, the protests were about race and Vietnam. They had nothing to do with something about no kings, or I have no idea what their thinking is. But remember, violence is violence, regardless of whether it's sensible or unsensible. There's such a word. Violence is violence, and it's a threat, and it can destroy communications. It can destroy the power that warms and cools your house and turns your stove on. We have to be very much aware of where we are living today, and it is very different than probably most of you expected. when you see some of these things going on, remember that that is another major source for a disaster. And while we can plan for small disasters, for things that can be resolved in 14, maybe 30 days, we as a family we need to be realistic that we cannot do that for a long and extended period of time. That's why we have to rely on going to people who organizations that are what I call preppers. They literally have the facilities to help people go have food, clothing, and shelter for a period of 30 months or more. Good morning. Hope this morning has been a good morning for you so far, learning a little bit about your responsibility as adults in today's sometimes unadult society. And I hope you think about it to every day, and especially when you go to that grocery store and you pick up those needed items. You know, this this is a time when we learn how important stewardship that's been defined in the Bible in many ways, financial and life-saving, is important. This has been Jim Whining, the ordinary man, looking at being a good planner for your family in the event of a disaster. Have a great day. God bless you, and God bless our country. Good day.